Welcome to Designing Common User Interfaces for iOS and Android at Code Rage 8. I'm really excited to be here with you today and discuss some of the best practices for developing applications for both iOS and Android. My name is Sarina DuPont. I'm the product manager for Rat Studio, and throughout this presentation I'll be discussing some of the design practices that you should apply when building applications for iOS and Android, followed by some demos, and at the end we're also going to be doing some live Q&A. Now, building apps with design patterns users expect is a really important concept and something that everybody should think about when they're building their application. And what that really consists of is building an application that includes certain design experiences and also a user experience that most customers nowadays are familiar with. And that includes swipe gestures, for example, for navigating between tabs, pinch and zoom if you have a PDF, for example, within your application, or an image. Also following certain standard user input patterns, such as shifting the form on keyboard focus, which is something that we have a really good demo for that ships with the product, and it's our keyboard toolbar demo, scrollable forms demo actually, that is included in the FireMonkey mobile folder. Also on sourceforge.net, if you search for Rad Space Studio, you can see all of our samples and the latest versions of our samples there as well. Swiping between forms and navigating via buttons, using animated transitions, etc. Another big important point is not to put too many user input controls onto one screen. Basically, one of the things to think about when you're building a mobile application is to ensure that that application is not just a replica of your desktop application, especially if you're developing an application for a phone form factor. Now, if you're developing an application for a tablet form factor, which is significantly larger, for example, the iPad, you can have some more of that functionality, but in general, your mobile application, whether it is designed for the phone or desktop, should not just be a replica of your desktop application. Of course, applications should be easy to use and not require long tutorials. One of the common scenarios and design patterns you see today in applications is they will have these slide between tabs as a quick and easy tutorial in case any type of instruction is needed, as you can see here in this example screenshot. That is something that can be done very easily with FireMonkey using our tab control and one of the tab position properties. Now, building your application menus. Now, toolbar-only navigation is pretty common, especially for single-screen applications. And as you can see in the screenshot here below, this is a screenshot of our photo editor demo. We just have a toolbar at the top where you can apply different photo effects. And then the second screenshot is a screenshot of the browser application running on an Android phone. And you can see that the navigation is really centric around the toolbar. All the navigation is on the toolbar. And as you can see here in the top right hand on the screenshot, you see something called an overflow menu. And this is a pop-up style menu that is specific to Android, is always positioned on a toolbar via these three squares that you can see. And a little later on I'm going to show you how to do some of that, how to build some of that UI using FireMonkey. Now, tab bar navigation. Now, tab bar navigation is very common nowadays in mobile applications. You can use it to divide apps into key focus areas. It also provides an intuitive interface since you're breaking up your application into certain categories, so to speak. And as you can see here on the right, one of the key differences between building an application for iOS versus Android is that on Android, tabs are always positioned at the top, just with text, whereas on iOS, tabs are positioned at the bottom with text and a glyph. Now, home screen navigation is something that's very popular in many apps today as well, as you can see in some of these example screenshots here. You can see on the left screenshot here, the example one, you can see that the iOS app and the Android app actually look very similar. They have a custom UI, but they both have this home screen navigation that allows the user to quickly access the different things that they're going to be doing with the application within one focus area. Now, a navigation drawer, that is very popular UI nowadays as well. You can see this in many applications. And what it basically means is that the navigation menu or the app menu is hidden by default and is invoked via a user action. And that is via tapping on a menu button or swiping to the left. And that is something that you can see across both iOS and Android. Now, layout management. In Delphi XE5 And with FireMonkey, you have many different ways you can lay out your application, and I'm going to show you some of that in the demos later on. Lay out your application so that it works really well across iOS and Android and also the desktop. And there are kind of three categories: alignment, and that's working with alignment, margins, padding, etc., all these different properties. Or anchors, and also form family. Now, form family allows you to load the correct form depending on the target device, and that is really good and very useful if you're working with different forms for landscape and portrait, for example. Now, one of the new features that we introduced in Rad Studio XE5 is MultiRes Bitmap, and that is a new bitmap property for T-image. And what it allows you to do is easily load in and define your own custom scales. So for iOS nowadays, we have a standard resolution and a high resolution, also referred to as Retina display. And on Retina, you have a 2x resolution compared to the standard resolution. However, on Android devices, you have many different resolutions. There are devices that are 1x, 1.35x, 1.5x, 2x, 3x, 3.3x, etc. So there's many different resolutions. And in order to ensure that your images, for example, background image, any type of graphics, logos, etc., that you're using in an application look crisp and really nice across all the different devices, both on iOS and Android, you can now leverage this MultiRes Bitmap property. And it allows you to type in the scale that you want to support. So, for example, 1x or 2x, that would be specific for iOS and Android. You could also add 1.5x and 3x if you wanted to support a variety of different Android devices. And then it allows you to load in your images at those sizes. For example, if your standard image is 100 by 100 pixel, your 2x image would be 200 by 200 pixels, etc. Native and custom styling. As I mentioned, we have support for Retina images. We have support for all these different resolution images via the different MultiRes Bitmap properties. We also have support for tab-controlled styling. On iOS, that includes support for text and glyphs. On Android, that includes support for text. And of course, also the style lookup property for all the different controls that allows you to easily change the UI on your different user interface controls. Now, key component differences. Now, looking at the mobile column here, T-list view and T-list box would be used in place of a T-tree view or a T-grid that you would use, for example, on the desktop. On the mobile device, you would use a T-list view component for long data-bound scrollable lists, and a T-list box component for small input dialogues, for example, an address form or a sign-up form, or also a settings page. Radio groups and radio buttons are specifically not common on iOS. On iOS, you would use a segmented control to divide up and allow single selection via T-speed buttons, and I'll show that a little later on, T-list box, or a T-radio button, but that is Android specific. Now, on the desktop, you would use a T-checkbox. In place on mobile, you would use a T-switch for iOS and Android. And on Android, you could also use a T-checkbox. Now, checkboxes and radio buttons are not commonly used on iOS. However, they are used on Android. Although for single selection on Android, especially in forms such as settings, it is also very common to use a switch and actually recommend it. Menu bars and main menu, those components are desktop specific. There are no real menus on mobile. They're either divided up via a toolbar with different toolbar buttons, like I showed in some of the screenshots, tab controls, etc. Now here's a list of the preferred mobile UI components. Now, as you're probably familiar, FireMonkey comes with many different components. Of course, you can change your UIs, you can use all the different components, but here's a list of the key menu components. For iOS and Android, T-button, T-speed button, T-label, T-edit, T-memo, etc., as you can see here. And those controls are really the default ones and the ones that are intended to be used on mobile. On Android also, you have T-checkbox and T-radio button. Those are also available on iOS, but are not part of the UI guidelines that Apple publishes. Now, looking at some do's and don'ts, toolbar button don'ts. You definitely want to ensure you have alignment set and margin set, and this is really important. I'll show this in a demo a little later on, that you have margins set. And what margins allow you to do is define how far from the top or bottom, left or right you're positioning your control. So for example, if we look at the screenshots here, you're seeing that I have button alignment set and a margin set. What that allows me to do is, if you look at the first screenshot on iOS 6, for example, bordered buttons are very common. Now, if I don't have an alignment set, in this case I've set it to 5 pixels, I would have this border of the button run right into my toolbar, which of course I don't want to do. Now, in order to ensure that your UI looks really good across iOS 6, iOS 7, and Android, you need to make sure that you set margins. And in this case, I just set a margin of 5, and as you can see, the UI looks really nice across iOS 6, iOS 7, and Android. Now, your FireMonkey applications, if you're running them on an iOS 6 device, you're going to get the iOS 6 UI. If you're running them on an iOS 7 device, the iOS 7 UI. Of course, on Android, the Android UI. Also, it can be set for titles. If you're working with toolbar titles, you need to set the alignment, text alignment, and vertical center alignments. So one of the common toolbar navigation types that you see is this overflow menu via an action bar. And an action bar is a toolbar that has additional functionality such as this overflow menu that allows you to easily show and hide additional menu items. And you can see this on the left here and in both of the screenshots. Now on the left here, this would be done via the combo box component, for example, that we ship with the product. And the combo box component has two properties that allow you to select how that component looks and behaves. For example, the combo box has a native drop-down kind, and in that case you would get that native pop-up menu that lets you do a single selection, or in this case you can do DDK custom and you get this drop-down menu. You could of course also use the T-list box in place and select to show and hide the list box on click. Again, to summarize, designing for different form factors, using alignment, anchors, and margins, and leveraging the form family property, or of course you could also use a separate form for each orientation, although most applications don't require that. Now, working with custom styles across multiple platforms. For example, you can see here our Jet style. This is a premium style that we ship with the product, and you can, of course, if-def your code to load a different style book for each of the different platforms. All those styles have all different resolutions built into one style, so you can just load a style book for each platform, load your style, and then use the code, for example, you see here, in order to display the right style at runtime depending on the target device. Now, application titles should always be centered and styled with the tool label property. As you can see here, you need to make sure that if you're working with toolbar buttons, that you align them to the contents, AL contents, the T-label component, and that allows you to ensure that all of your other controls that you're placing on the toolbar are aligned correctly. Navigational back buttons, as you can see here in the don'ts, they should not be used for canceling an action, they should not be placed on the bottom toolbar, and they should always be aligned to the left. They're used for navigating to a prior screen, always shown on the top left corner. And you should use a T-speed button with a back tool button styling option. Now, if you look at this little code snippet here on the screenshot, you will see that it's also very common, of course, on Android not to show a back button at all, and just to use the hardware or virtual back button that you see on your mobile device. And that is something that we've implemented for the mobile templates as well. So when you're doing File New FireMonkey mobile application, you're presented with these different templates, and any of the templates that have navigation built into them actually have some code in that template that says if you're running this application on Android, hide the back tool button and instead leverage the device back button. Tab control, just as a summary, on iOS, the tab control should always be styled with an item and an icon and text and aligned to the bottom, and on Android, aligned to the top. Again, additional navigation on iOS. What is very common is that if you have a UI that requires more than 5 tabs, and on a phone form factor on iOS you're not supposed to have more than 5 tabs, you would make that 5th tab a more tab via the more tab styling, and then you would display additional navigation like you can see in the first 2 screenshots here via a styled list box. Or on Android, instead of a more tab, you could also use this overflow toolbar pop-up menu, and that can be done via a list box, for example. Segmented toolbar control, this is a very common control. You should parent a T layout control to a T toolbar, and that ensures that all your controls are centered correctly, and you're using the segmented control styling. T switch control, don't parent a switch to a toolbar. This is a common mistake that I've seen. You also shouldn't just be placing a switch onto a form without a list. So here's some do's. You should always use a T-switch in a list item anchored to the top right. Also use margins, so that ensures that your T-switch doesn't run the full length of your list box. And Android, you can also use a checkbox. However, while a checkbox can be used to turn a single option on or off on Android, a T-switch is really recommended. Radio groups, iOS, you really don't use radio buttons. On Android, and you can use radio buttons. However, if you're looking for a common implementation across iOS and Android, it's recommended to use a T-list box with any of these item appearance modes that you see here, item data modes, checked so you can actually display a check mark on selection, or a T-speed button with a group name, as you can see in the second screenshot. General button use, of course, buttons should be the same width and height, especially if they're displayed in a stacked manner. Creating lists, again, T-list box is designed for settings lists and input forms, whereas T-list view is designed for long data-bound scrollable lists. Now let's get to some demos. So the first demo I'm going to show you is the mobile controls demo. This is one of the demos that ships with the product, and it shows you all the different styled UI controls. So you can see these are all speed buttons, and you can see how to, for example, parent and edit inside a layout. It has a lot of good layout examples and also styling examples to look at. And as you can see here, I can toggle between iOS 6 and iOS 7. I can also toggle between iOS and Android. Now the next example we're going to look at is a toolbar. Now a lot of apps today will have a segmented control, a toolbar segmented control. This is very common on iOS, but it is also seen on Android. And if you wanted to have, for example, all of the segments displayed next to each other, which is the standard way of displaying the segments, and also have them be centered, the best way to do that would be by parenting a T-layout component to our toolbar, which is what we've done. Then we've assigned we've set the AL center alignment property for the layout. And as you can see here, we have 3 parented T-speed buttons, and I've just named them left, middle, and right. Each of the speed buttons is styled via segmented button left, segmented button middle, and segmented button right, as you can see here. Another thing that we've done as well is we've selected all of our speed buttons here via multi-select, and we've typed in a group name. You can name it whatever you want. But what that does is it builds an association between the different controls so that it can actually, the T speed buttons can actually be used as a segmented control. And then you can see, for example, here I have the press property set. So we have our T layout that's aligned to the center, and we have 3 parented T speed buttons, and for each speed button we've set an alignment. So the left one is AL left, the center one is AL center, and the right one is AL right. And this is all done by, again, using a toolbar, parenting the T layout component, and then using several speed buttons. Now the settings project, this is another sample that ships with the product, and this shows you how to do a standard settings page for iOS and Android. Let's switch this to our Nexus. You can see how the styling adjusts. In this case, what we have is we have switch controls that are actually parented to a list box item. And as you can see here, we've also set the alignment property. What that does is alignment right, for example, vertically centers our switch, and that means it automatically centers it vertically, providing the same number of pixels of space above and below the switch. And as you can see here, we've also set a margin of 5, and what that allows us, or 10 in this case, if we had set it to 0, you would see that while the control would be actually vertically centered, it would run right over to the outline of the border of our list box. So let's change this to 10. You can see we've done this for all the different items here, that have a switch parented to them. As we have a closer look at our settings list, you can see this has a couple key settings. It's just a T-list box. Grouping kind is grouped. And then the style lookup has been set to transparent list box. You can see that account info is a group header, and the way you can add those is after you have set the grouping kind to grouped and the style lookup to transparent list box style, you can actually just right click and you'll see a group header item that now is available, and then you can also just add the items, the regular items. For each item you have various styling options, so if we expand the item data property here, you can see that we have more. It gives you the arrow, we have a check mark, we have an info button for detail, etc. You can also select to add detailed text, which would be displayed right here. And then for each item, we also have the style lookup property for each list box item, where you define the actual layout. So you could say I want to have a bottom detail item, for example, and then personal and account type would appear in a stacked manner. We are also using a tab control, and in this case we're using a tab control with a tab position of none. And what that allows us to do is to be able to create a layout with 2 pages basically, without any visible tabs. And you can see here we can go to tab 2 and we can go back to tab 1. And we also have an action list parented to an action list on our form, and we can see we have set up an on item click event. And in this case we are executing an action, and what that allows us to do is it allows us to leverage the transition action to go between the settings page and the detail page. So you can see here we have a combo box with various items, and this allows us to add our own custom items. Now here's an example of a common UI that you see on Android, and that is an action bar, which is just a toolbar with an overflow button. And in this case we have a T-speed button parented to our toolbar, and we have it styled as a details tools button. And if we switch here to iPhone 5, for example, you can see that on iPhone 5 this will be displayed via a bordered button, which is why it's really important to set a margin. In this case we set it to 5, because if I change this to 0, you will see that our control will run right into the side of our form, which of course we don't want. So we just set a margin of 5 here, and then our UI will look very nice across iOS 6, 7, and Android. In this case we just have a list box with 4 items in it, and on click we are showing or hiding the list box, and also we have set it to invisible. Now let me run this on my Android device. Now while you could have this UI of course also on iOS, this is a very specific Android UI. I'm going to select my Android target here for my project, make sure my project is active, and I'm going to deploy this to my Nexus 4 phone. So now I'm going to launch my Android screen view, and this is an app that Jim McKeith from our team wrote, and it mirrors my actual display. So right now I'm holding a Nexus 4 in my hand, and you can see that mirrored onto my screen here. And here you see my menu. And again, I can click the overflow button to show and hide my pop-up menu. Okay, now let's have a look at this tabs example. So tabs on iOS are always displayed at the bottom. That's the standard way of displaying them, and they should always be displayed with a glyph. Whereas on Android, they should be displayed at the top and are traditionally displayed without any glyphs. So we just have added an ifdef here on form create, and that is ifdef Android. We're going to change the position to the top. So now I'm going to select this project, deploy it to my Nexus 4, and we can have a look at it. And let's have a look. With our screen view app, you can see that here on Android our tab is displayed at the top. Okay, let's see. Look at this. Yeah, this is one of the samples or templates that ships with the product called Tab Form with Navigation. All those templates are available and accessible via the File New FireMonkey mobile application wizard, and I've chosen the Tab with Navigation template. You can see here we have tabs, a tab control with an embedded tab, a next button, and then as we go to the back screen, that's the previous tab, we have a back button. Now, back buttons are not that common on Android, especially toolbar back buttons. Now, you can, of course, create a UI that shows a back button also on Android, but if you look at the code here, what we've done is we've actually said if you're on Android, we're going to hide this back button, btn back.visible, and that is just the name. Btn back is the name that I've assigned or set for my speed button here. And you can also see that we've set up an on-form key up event, and we're able to access the hardware key to be able to go back between our tabs. So if we're on tab 6, we can use it to go back to tab 5, or tab item 5. The same can also be seen in the Phone Master Detail application. This is also one of the templates that you can have a look at. Now, the virtual keyboard, and this is another really good example to look at. This is a keyboard demo that ships with the product. And as you can see here, we have a list box with various list box items. And this looks the same across Android and iOS. Just displayed, the list box is displayed differently across the two depending on the style. So iOS has a different style, of course, than Android. But what you can see here is a different alignment. We've chosen the AL-Vert Center property for the alignment. And what that allows us to do here is, as you can see, this is centered vertically. And what we've done then is we've set a left margin. So we want the spacing between this and this to be 150 pixels. And that's for our parented edit. And we want 10 pixels on the right. As you can see, if I change this to 170, I'm shortening the width of our edit. And if I rotate it, you'll see we're retaining the same amount of spacing on the left and right. And what that allows us to do is have the same amount of spacing across both orientations, which is very nice. So if you're using the AL-Vert Center property, for example, for your parented edit controls, then you just need to make sure that you're setting margins. Because if you don't set a margin, I'll show you what this looks like, then, for example, if you remove the left and right margins, the edit is going to run the whole width of your form. So in this case, right 10, left 150, and then that is retained across all the different orientations. Now, if we're having a look at a toolbar again, we're going to align this toolbar to the bottom. And I'm going to put a couple speed buttons on it. And I'm going to put a label as well. Okay. The label I'm going to set to tool, style lookup property to tool label. And make sure this is set to center, and text align is set to center as well. And I'm going to put text footer. And then my speed button, I'm going to align to the left, and I'm going to style it. This button. The second speed button, I'm also going to align to the left, and I'm going to style it. And then the third speed button, I'm going to align to the right and style it. Now I'm going to switch this to iPhone, and actually iOS 6. And you can see here, you also, for iOS 6, you also have debordered styles. And those are styles that Apple introduced for iOS 6 and earlier versions of the iOS OS. And as you can see here, we need to make sure that we have this set to AL contents. And if you have the label property set to AL contents and then have alignment set, then the text property, the parented label on the toolbar, will be centered regardless of the alignments of your parented speed buttons. So it is set to AL contents. You can see here we have these bordered buttons on iOS 6. So again, as we did earlier, we're going to set a margin. So this is our first speed button. We're going to set a margin of left 5. And we're going to do the same for the second speed button. So we have some margins between each button. And then the same here on our speed button 4, we're going to set a margin right 5. You also need to make sure that your label has been sent to back, which it has in this case already. And as you can see here, we have margins set on all of our controls. You can of course also work with anchors. So in this case, what we've done is we've actually, for the case of the pop-up list, we've actually just set anchors to top right. And that retains the anchor position then across the different orientations. So thank you very much for joining us for this Code Rage session, and we're now going to open it up to some questions.
Okay, so there's a question here about the iOS 7 support in XE5.
So we released
a separate download, right?
Yes, we released a patch, and that's a separate download, and it requires you to have XE5 installed already. So you need to make sure you have XE5 installed, and then you run this little patch. It's a very quick little installer. Literally takes seconds. And then what you see in the IDE at design time, you can toggle between iOS 6 and iOS 7, which you also saw in my demo. And it allows you to see at design time how the UI looks different. One of the key reasons for why that is important, as you probably saw in my video, iOS 6 had something called bordered buttons, toolbar buttons. So for example, the camera icon would have a button that would be filled with a gradient and would have borders. So those toolbar buttons were significantly larger than, for example, on iOS, which is a lot more of a simplified style in the sense it doesn't have these bordered icons. And you have to account for the different sizes. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to set margins on toolbar buttons. Like I showed in the video, for example, you have a speed button parented to a T toolbar component. You're going to want to set a margin of 5 on the right side, for example, if you're aligning the button to the right. And if you're toggling between your iOS 6 and iOS 7 style, you will see that they're then vertically centered, which is very important, because what it means is that it takes up the right amount of space vertically across iOS and Android, iOS 6, iOS 7, and Android. And the reason that's important is that, for example, on Android, the toolbar is taller and the buttons have a different size. So you want to use alignments to ensure that they are centered vertically and that they look correct on all the different platforms. And to get back to the original question, of course, once you install the iOS 7 patch, then you get support for iOS 6, iOS 7, not only at design time, but also at runtime. What it does at runtime, it automates the whole process for you. So at runtime, if you're building an app, after you've the patch installed, it will automatically load the iOS 7 style. If you're on an iOS 7 device, it will automatically run the iOS 7 style. If you're on iOS 6 device, it will automatically load and run the iOS 6 style app. There's one question here, and that is, where is each OS stylebook template? So I don't know what the exact question is here, but I'll try to interpret it to the best of my abilities. I think the question here is the basic styles, the native styles, and it's the light Android style, the iOS 7 style, the Windows and Mac styles. Those are loaded automatically for you at runtime. You don't have to do anything for them. For mobile, you also see a representation of those native styles at design time. So when you're working on an iOS project, you get the iOS style. When you're working on an Android project, you get the Android style. However, on Windows and Mac, you don't see them at design time, but you get them at runtime. If you are working with custom style books, then you can look at a DocWiki article that we have that actually talks about the code you should add to load the correct style book at runtime. Each of the style books, for example, each of the styles, like the Jet style, has a specific style for each platform, and you need to make sure that you assign that style to the platform so it will load the correct style.
So there's a question about the iOS 7 simulator and XE5. You need to download that separately from Apple?
Yes, that is available via Apple. You have to download the Xcode 5, the command line tools, simulator, etc.
And upgrade to Xcode 5
yes.
First, and then get all the right tools, and that'll give you the 6.1 simulator and beyond. There's a question over here in the overflow room. Misha asks, what kind of control should be used to design the home page? Should I use TImage to simulate a button with image?
You're probably referring to some of those home navigation screens that I showed in the presentation. Like I showed some sample apps that had a bunch of different buttons on the home screen. It really depends on how you design your app. Let's say you have an app that lets you do 5 different things. I don't know, buy tickets, view current tickets you've purchased, add a payment method, etc. You could just create 4 T images with and load an icon to them. Of course, you could also use a T button on the form and just make sure they're aligned in like a grid pattern. but T-image definitely would work. A nice thing to do if you're using like a T-image would be to have a different image that you're loading on click. So for example, you might want to have 2 images of an icon, and the second icon could have an outline, so that you're showing the user when they're actually clicking with their finger or tapping with their finger that they've actually triggered an event. That's a pretty nice thing to do when you're building mobile apps especially, and it's pretty standard across desktop as well to ensure that users are getting some kind of feedback to their action.
There's a question about how is the better way to use responsive design on XE5, and I think we have a session later on that, don't we?
Robert Love tomorrow on Code Rage on Wednesday.
Where can I find the examples that show the use of inertia on mobile apps?
I think that was a question that came up in Darren's session earlier, and I think that Jim had typed up some answers for list view, and I think he said fmx.platform.ios was some examples to look at.
Yeah, there's the source code if you have Pro and above. If you have Trial or Starter, those don't include the RTL source code. But list view component has that kind of inertia and bounce.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the examples that Darren mentioned. I know that Jim was typing away very quickly during that session.
I was trying to keep up.
And Robert's session is Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time, responsive Delphi design.
So there was a question about emulator performance. There's a couple articles in DocWiki about that. 2 tips. Make sure you're using used host GPU on the emulator setup. And if you're running your emulator inside a virtual machine, it's very slow. There's an article in the DocWiki about how to run the emulator on the host machine or an external computer. So check those out.
I see another question here. And the question is, how about the need to scroll the screen when the keyboard pops up and covers the edit field? So this is a common scenario in mobile applications. We actually have a really good demo for you to look at, and it's called Scrollable Forms, I believe, and it's in the FireMonkey mobile folder. And what it does, it actually shows you how to shift up the contents of your form using a scroll box and an animation, and it recalculates the position of the edit controls as you're bringing up the keyboard. And that's a really good demo to look at. It ships with the product, so if you go to your public documents, RAD Studio 12.0 samples FireMonkey mobile folder, you will see it there. We also have a SourceForge directory, so if you go to sourceforge.net and type in RAD space Studio, you can go to the XE5 branch and you can get access to all the latest versions of our demos. But again, the demo is called Scrollable Forms, and that's in the FireMonkey mobile folder.
Yeah, actually I thought that way of handling it was better than the way Apple recommends for Xcode developers.
It uses the vertical scroll to move the form up.
Is a way to hide checkboxes for some, not all items in a tree view for mobile devices.
I don't know that there's a built-in way of doing that. What I would recommend doing is not really using a tree view on mobile. That's not really a standard control, even across Android. iOS, of course, you have the Apple human interface guidelines, which users are, supposed to adhere to, especially if you're submitting apps to the App Store. On Android, that is a little more fragmented in the sense that, of course, there are guidelines, but they're not as specific as on iOS. That being said, what I would recommend using is the T-list view. You can customize the T-list view. We have some really good examples that actually show you how to extend the T-list view but beyond what we have by default built in. And they are also in the FireMonkey mobile folder, and there's a list view subfolder, and it actually has some custom design time packages that Jim Tierney, who has a session after me, created.
We need a virtual decimal keypad, i.e. with numbers and a decimal point, only for the T-edit component on iOS.
Number box does numbers. The other keyboard type.
There's a lot of people in here saying they're very excited about this, so thank you.
Okay, VKT, numbers and punctuation is the keyboard type you want to use. So on any editable box, go to keyboard type property, VKT, numbers and punctuation.
So here's someone saying that they've had trouble with the alignment of controls in a certain case. I have 2 labels, one on the left and one on the right. I want the left label to auto-size based on its text, but I can't find an alignment setting that makes the right label resize accordingly so that I can maintain the proper distance between the resizing label and itself.
I'd have to create a project and look into that. You should be able to select the auto-size property, but if you, Jim can type in the answer here. If you sent me an email, I would be more than happy to look into that for you, and if I don't have an immediate answer, I'll find someone who can assist with that.
Sarina.DuPont?
Yes, sarina.dupont@embarcadero.com. So I don't know who asked this question, but if you could send me an email, that would be great.
So many alignment choices, most right, most left,
Yeah, if you normally, one comment I would like to make is if you're working with a toolbar and a label and you have buttons and you are aligning buttons to the right and left, you should set the alignment for the label to AL contents and make sure it's been sent to back via the right-click context menu. And that ensures that you have all the click events on the toolbar for the toolbar buttons. And it also ensures that the label is centered and the buttons are aligned to the left and right, and the centering of the label is actually retained. And of course, then to have it centered, besides setting the label alignment to AL contents, you should also set the text align and vertical text align to TA center.
So someone asking if Xcode 5 allows you to handle devices that are on iOS 6. It's a separate download from Xcode 5, but yes, you can.
And you also can, with Xcode 5, you can have, if you were in my session, you get simulators for 6.0 and 6.1 that you can download and use.
Someone's saying they're having trouble with the simulator working at all. On the Android simulator, it is slow. It doesn't work on. I've had some machines that won't run at all. That's the nature of it. Check out that article on using a host GPU, and if you're running an VM, check out that one as well for using your remote machine. Or pick up a Nexus 7. They're like $200. Actually, someone was saying that the old Nexus 7, the one from last year, which isn't that old, is go get one.
$129.
Yeah, $129. Great little investment there. I have a phone that has a long list to display. On an iPhone, I have a long list to display. What component can I use to display partial lists loading only the data currently in view?
You should still use TList View. TList View is the component designed for long data-bound scrollable lists. If you're creating just a short list where you don't have a lot of scrolling, for example, just like a settings page with a couple items, or like an address book type of form like you would see on Xcode for not on Xcode, on iOS or on your iOS device for adding contacts, and you can use the list box with different styles. Otherwise, it's recommended to use TList View. I think we have an example for that. I'll need to look into that. I think we have an example that actually shows that. I don't think it's on SourceForge though, so I'll look into that. That's a good request for a sample.
Thank you so much, Sarina.
You're welcome. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. This has been obviously a very exciting release for us, and we're really excited to do the Code Rage 8 event. And hopefully there's a lot of good information here. One of the questions that was asked, of course, was, will this be available for later viewing? And the answer is yes. And you'll either get an email, or if you follow us on Twitter or Facebook, we'll let you know when those are up too.
Thank you so much, Sarina.
Thank you. Bye.